Welcome back to the 25 Days of Flows, the Power Automate Advent Calendar. Today we're going to build something that can help us every day when we travel. So I travel for business, I bet you do too. And one of the biggest responsibilities you have, in addition to handling your business, is keeping track of all your expenses. And so you need to hold on to those receipts. And I can't tell you how many times I've lost a receipt or had something spill on it, or throw it out by accident, and therefore I lose my refund. So it's kind of really important to keep track of your receipts so that you can collect your refund when you come back to work, right? So I'm going to give you a handy tool that you can use for this case. And so today we're going to build a flow called Upload Receipts to SharePoint, and this is an instant button flow. But we're going to learn a lot in this particular flow. We're going to learn how to set custom properties on SharePoint because we don't just want to upload the receipt. We want to enable ourselves to roll that data up. And maybe we want to do some analysis on it. So we're actually going to create custom properties in SharePoint and push the custom property values into the library with the photo. And then I'll show you how you can even consolidate that list, and it gives you some nice reports that you can use to build your expense report or pass that data around to other people. And it's possible if your system of expenses has a REST API to actually be doing the expense in the workflow as well. Okay, so let's get started talking about the connector. We are going to use notifications, but for the most part, this is a SharePoint connector day. But this exact button could be done to any content type that allows you to hold a document. All right, so Box, OneDrive, whatever you prefer, it doesn't matter. It can even be emailed to you. But I prefer SharePoint in this case because I can easily create custom columns and I can give access to other people easily as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go over to SharePoint first and prep for this. So we're going to do this solution end-to-end from scratch. And I've got these two windows that I'm going to put side by side. One is Flow and one is SharePoint. And I'm just going to click New. And I actually went to Site Contents first. And then I click New. And now I'm going to choose a document library. So I'm not going to use the default library for this. I'm going to call this Receipt Photos. Very simple. And storage for business receipts during travel. Okay, so now somebody could read the definition of this library and know exactly what it's for. I'm going to click Create. And now here's where the metadata comes in. So when you create a library, it shows you these three columns: name, modified, modified by. If you go to the Edit Current View, you will see that it also has a bunch of system columns that you're able to use. So I'm going to make a little bit of adjustment here. Instead of modified and modified by, I'm going to choose created and created by, so I know who uploaded the folder. That's going to happen for me automatically, so I don't even need to do anything in Flow. It's going to pick up these modified and created by timestamps and people. I'm going to include file size because I usually do in libraries just so I can keep track of how big these things are. And then finally, I'm going to add a new sort. So instead of sorting by name, I'm going to sort by created date, and I'm going to do it in descending order so that all of these are actually listed in descending, the most recent at the top. Okay, that's just me customizing the view. And actually, I'm going to save created and created by. First, I'm going to edit. I'm going to add some more columns to this library. Now, I can add columns here. I love that they just let you just add them right there. It's really great. But I'm going to add them using the library settings. The only reason is because I know Flow needs these internal names sometimes. And so because it could come up in an OData query or something that I'll need later, I find it that I'm comfortable using the library settings so I can control the file name. So on the title, I'm actually going to change title to location. And we're going to push that from Flow automatically, nothing for the user to do. I'm going to create a column called purchase date because I want to make sure my expense reports have to have the date of the purchase, not the date of the expense report. So I'm going to put the purchase date, but I'm also going to default it to today because if I'm good, I will always upload it on the day that I bought it because I'm afraid of losing my receipt, right? So I'm going to default this to today's date so that I know that it will always have right now. But I can always change it, and we're going to actually send it from Flow. Purchase date is a required column. I'm also going to add the amount. And you're probably wondering, why would I add the amount? It's in the photo. It's in the photo, but I want to call it out in the SharePoint list so that I can use it in calculations easier. Now, in real life, I could definitely, thank you. I would definitely, I'm sorry, I should say this differently. I could definitely OCR the photo and then do something to pull the number out. I would like to use AI Builder to create a forms model, but I can't predict the format of the receipt. Now, on the other hand, if our company generated the receipt, or if these were receipts collected from a company that has the same receipt format, I could use AI Builder to recognize that photo under a particular model and pull the amount out for me. Okay, we're gonna have to do that on some other day, but that's another option you can think about. But in this case, I just want the convenience of adding the amount to a list column that I can use in calculations with Power BI or other things without having to OCR the photo. Okay, next thing I'm gonna do is add the expense type. So I'm gonna create a column and I'm gonna call this expense type. Now I made a list of expense types that I'm gonna put into a choice column. And I actually chose these by the order in which they occur. I get my airfare first, then my hotel, then I Uber over to the airport or the hotel, then I'm hungry by then, and then by the evening I want to drink, and then equipment might be, let's say I'm doing a hackathon or I'm proctoring a lab, and maybe we decide to show off physical buttons. We might need to buy those flick buttons that we use. So that would be an equipment expense. Or let's say I'm going to a user group. I usually like to give them something they can raffle off. And so that's another equipment expense. So I'll include that. And then I'll include other. Now, the thing about other is don't go crazy with other. If you start noticing that other becomes 40% of your data, you've got bad data now. So you should watch your other, and when you see it starting to grow, because you're looking at your overall metrics, then deep dive into it and see if you can pull out some new values that you missed and use other less. And I really think that's true for everything. Other is not definitive, and if it grows too big, it destroys your analytics. Okay, I'm not going to put a default value, and I am going to require this. And the reason is because I don't want them to be able to skip this field. And so if they're using SharePoint. Now, FYI, and I talk a lot, but these are important points I want you to understand. There are times that I will make this single line of text and control the dropdown only from Flow. There are times that I will do both the dropdown in SharePoint and in Flow. And usually the reason I would do the latter is because people will be uploading folders directly in SharePoint without Flow, probably almost or as much as they will be using the button. In that case, I don't want to have to force them to type these words because that's really crazy when it comes to grouping, sorting, and analytics. So I will go ahead and make sure they have a choice list here as well. But here's the risk. If you use a choice list in SharePoint and in Flow, because Flow's choice list in the button is not dynamic, it is not pulling from data, you have to hard code it, then you need to warn the owners of this list. Because if they change this list, let's say somebody goes in and from, I don't know what, some crazy reason, they decide hotel is wrong. We need to call it lodging. So now your flow says hotel and the schema in SharePoint says lodging. So guess what? If somebody picks hotel in that button, they're going to hit an error because the server's going to say we have no such a thing, right? So just be aware that when you do it in both places, you have the responsibility to notify list owners that they should not change the column setting. Now, most of the time, it's only the list owners you have to worry about because contributors don't have the ability to change column structure. Only the people who own or have full control over this list will be able to do that. All right. And everybody who's a contributor can easily add to the list, and there's no risk of them making changes to your schema. So all of that's all about SharePoint and Flow possibly being on a disconnect. And we're going to talk about that in another scenario today as well. All right. So now we got the expense type here. So let's see what columns do we have. We should have purchase date. We should have, there we go. We have location because we renamed title. We have purchase date, which is required. We have expense type was required. And we have amount, which is going to be required. The only thing I'm going to not require is the first two. I'm not actually going to require location. And I'm not going to require purchase date. So that's a no required. And the reason why is I'm setting this default date. I'm happy to take it if they don't put a date. All right. But we're going to remember what's not required when we build our button. All right. So sometimes when I'm building these scenarios for you, I'm actually choosing things in order to introduce you to different concepts that you can use, not just for this solution, but anything. All right. So we're going to make an instant button and we're going to name this BTN travel. I'm just going to put receipt pics. You want to keep this name fairly short. And if you can get it by with button receipt, that's good enough. Because the thing is, you can even say this is receipts. I'll tell you why I put the BTN in the front. It's because I have a lot of flows now all over the place. And so by prefixing that with BTN, when I go to my flows, I can search for all buttons that start with BTN, so all flows that start with BTN. So today I cannot search for all buttons, but if I name it BTN and then the name, now I can search for all buttons, right? And so I do that in many different cases wherever I want to group the discovery of my flows. All right, so this is receipts, and we're gonna use a button. And then we're going to hit create. All right. So this word receipt will be in a blue circle on our phone. And so we'll be able to press that button and understand what it's for because it won't be truncated. If you make it too long, the button name will be truncated. Okay. So let's edit our trigger first because this is where we're going to collect the information from whoever presses that button. In this case, me. All right. So I'm going to start with the photo. Notice the types of inputs we have. I'm going to choose file. And so this is going to be my receipt photo, which I'm going to learn how to spell. And they can therefore select a file on their phone or take a picture of the receipt. Notice that I can add to this placeholder text. I can completely revise this, and this is helpful to the end user to know what to do. So I do edit the placeholder text. Next thing I want is I want the purchase date. So I'm going to choose the date. And so notice I'm always picking the the input type that matches what I want to collect. This is a beautiful little date selector control. So it's really, really nice. The next thing I'm going to do is add my category, my amount. Let's put the amount next. And so if you want to delete something, I made a mistake, just press delete here and you can delete them. And then let's go ahead and select number. And this will be our amount. And then it says, please enter a number. And then the last thing we're going to do is the expense type. And this one is going to be that drop down we talked about. Okay. Now I'm making the expression states optional. I forgot to do that. So I'm going to go over here and it says make this field optional. So that field's optional. But the only reason it's optional is because on SharePoint there's a default date. So I made it optional. The amount is required. The expense type is required. So everything is required by default unless you go over here and say make the field optional. Okay, so this one is going to not be entering your input. You're going to select the expense type. And we're going to go over to these three dots and add a drop down. And then we're going to put those same things that we put over here. And this is where it's critical, guys, gals, everybody. Be careful that you don't have your flow not matching your SharePoint when you are using drop downs on SharePoint, because if they do not match, they will not work. If you're using metadata from taxonomy, that's fine. But just again, you have to make sure there's a matching. And one day I might show you how you can do even some tricky things when it comes to taxonomy. All right, so entertainment, equipment, and other. Okay, so I will double, triple check that I match. I will let my list owners know, please don't change those options unless you let me know so I can update the flow, because otherwise you can break your flow. Okay, so now we have our trigger finished. And we're going to add the step to create the file. You cannot save flow until you have a trigger and an action. So I'm going to save after I create this file. So I'm just going to create file, and I'm going to select my site, and I'm going to select the library. Now notice I'm going all the way to the right. Wait a minute, I picked the wrong action. My bad. I'm going to click create file. For SharePoint. Got it. And then I'm going to pick my site. And then I'm going to go all the way to the right to this library icon. And then I'm going to pick my library, which in this case is, sorry, I forgot. Receipt photos. All right, so there's receipt photos. If you use the default library, and I didn't because of the metadata, this metadata is specific to photos. It has nothing to do with any other documents, so that's why I made a new library. Shared documents and documents are the same library. Depends on what action you're using. But whenever you're talking about folder paths, you'll see shared documents. Whenever you're talking about libraries or lists, you'll see documents. Okay, so we're going to pick receipt photos. And then the name of the file, let's kind of just start with the word receipt. Let's get the current date, because I don't really want the timestamp. I just want the date time. So I'm going to do date time. And current time will give me the time that after this button is pressed. And I'm going to use that time here as part of my receipt. I could also put the user's first name, for instance, here, but I'd have to add the other connector that gives me their first name. And then I'm going to just put a dot and PNG. All right, most of my file types work well with PNG. And then what I'm going to do is in the file content, and part of the reason why you see this way as opposed to on the right is because my screen is thinner. If I widen it, you'll start to see the dynamic content on the right. So that's why you saw it different just now. If you have experimental features on, you may also see a third method. All right, so I put the receipt photo from the button there. I'm going to save now. So I usually try to save after my first two actions are done, like my first two critical actions. This way I know for a fact I will not have to start over. And I looked for the word saved up here to know I'm saved. Now I'm going to show you experimental features. I'm going to go into settings here. And notice that Flow has a toggle switch for experimental features. Now, those of you that are used to Power Apps, the difference is in Power Apps, you get a list of experimental features that you can select to be on and off. With Flow, on the other hand, when you turn this on, it turns on all experimental features. So I would only do this if you're not working on a production flow. So if you're playing around with Flow, maybe you're doing some testing, you can go ahead and keep those on. We love to hear your feedback when you have this on. But if you're working on an app, a flow that's, production, and you want to make sure that everything works smoothly, you might want to toggle off experimental features so that you don't run into any issues experimenting. When you toggle that switch either direction, you will have to refresh the page, which is why I saved the flow first. And this happens often. Don't let it frighten you. After I refresh the page, the other actions are missing. I'm not intimidated because I know I saved it, right? So I'm going to go over here to my flows. I'm going to toggle away from here. I'm going to edit, and you'll see that it's all back. So that was all an illusion. All right, so now we've created the file. Next thing we're going to do is add those properties, because did you notice that we didn't have any place to put all those goody questions that we asked up here? So now we're going to call SharePoint again and look for the file properties of the file we just created. And those of you that are SharePoint users, you know that the first thing I'm going to need in order to edit those file properties is what? Wonder how many of you are going to get that right. So I'm going to look for update file properties. Click on that. And I'm going to have to put the site. So I guess I really meant the third thing. I'm going to put the site. I'm going to put the library. Notice that here I picked from a folder because here it's focusing on the path. And that's why shared documents is on this here as shared documents, because that's the internal name of that library. So when you're talking about paths, you're talking about URL paths. And so in that case, you use the folder. In this case, it's literally asking for the library name. And so you'll see documents because that's the display name. But I'm going to pick receipt photos, which is almost identical to what I had before. And then I'm going to insert the ID from the create file. So here, create file, item ID. Next thing I'm going to do is start plugging in. So this is the only thing that's coming from SharePoint because we have to tell it which file are we editing. And this is a unique identifier that came out of the create file action right here. So that will help it know which one. All right, now we can plug all this stuff in there. So amount, we'll put that in there. I'm going to make a change to that. And then location, we're going to look at our trigger button. And I think I'll just put city, comma, state. Now you could put anything you want. Like I've kind of played around with using the zip code as a location. Whatever is the lowest common denominator that you might use in analytics for grouping and sorting and stuff. Purchase date is the current time, or it's the purchase date they typed in here. So I'm going to use purchase date that they typed in there. And then airfare, looks like it got spelled wrong somehow. So when I drop down this is the expense type. So let's just do a quick save. Whenever you notice something differ like that, I would save immediately and then close it. So I'm going to close it up and then reopen it because it might be just had a little glitch. Nope, it says airfare. Did I name SharePoint list like that? I did. Look at me. So I will change this to airfare. Unfortunately, though, for OData queries, it still will remember the internal name without the RE. But as long as we use the dynamic tokens, it will say airfare. Okay, so that was a mistake I made. You know, in many cases, I would do that column over just because I want to make sure it's clear to everybody what these things are. So I am not going to drop this drop down and pick one of these things, because then I would be hard coding this response. Instead, what I want to do is use the dynamic value that came from here. So I'm going to hit enter custom value, and then I'm going to make sure that from my trigger, I pick the amount. No, it's not the amount. What is this? Expense type. Sorry, because it's wrong. I don't know what it is. Let's see what this says. So that was a mistake on my part. So because I have this like this in SharePoint, it wrote that instead of expense type. So that should be expense type. My mistake. And notice that it has the word value after it. And what this means is that it's a choice list. If it wasn't a choice list, it would just have the column name. So let me go fix SharePoint and show you what I mean. So I'm going to fix SharePoint so that says expense type and not airfare. But unfortunately for OData queries, this would still say that airfare. So in real life, to be honest with you, I would delete this column and recreate it correctly with the correct display and internal name. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to correct it. And then I'm going to close my flow and reopen it. Flow doesn't respond to changes you're making live. But if you close the flow and reopen it, it'll go and reconnect and get updated. So now it says expense type. But if I were to use at any time, let's say I did a lookup or I wanted to do a get files, if I needed this column in an OData query, I would have to use that first name that you saw, the name that is hard-coded in SharePoint, because it's the first name that matters. So just be aware of that and try to make your internal names match your display whenever you can. If you can't, do the internal names first, make sure you jot them down, and then you can add spaces between these later. But again, it doesn't change the internal name. Okay? All right, good. All of that was interesting, wasn't it? Unexpected, but hey, that's life. All right, so now we've finished our flow. Basically, this is done. There's nothing else to do. But I might want to notify myself that this all happened nicely, right? So I'm going to add a new step, and I'm going to use notifications, and I'm going to choose send me a mobile notification. And in here, I'm going to say your receipt and I might even put the amount there, was successfully uploaded. Okay, just so what I know. And if I want to give myself a link to the file, I can do that as well, because that's part of the SharePoint. So this link will open the photo. So I guess I should put receipt. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to open files on your mobile device, here's the big tip from Audrey. Install OneDrive for Business on your phone. Authenticate into OneDrive for Business. This way, when you click on links from Power Apps or Flow, you will be able to open in OneDrive the SharePoint file. And one day we'll talk about that more. You can also download the SharePoint mobile app as well. Okay, so what if it didn't work though? What if this thing didn't work? Like, what are some reasons it wouldn't work? So when it comes to file names on SharePoint, we can't have and signs and asterisks and symbols of pi. So if we passed a file name that was bad, SharePoint might kick it out. If we pass a file type that's not supported in the MIME of the SharePoint list of supported properties, it'll kick it out. If it's over size limits that SharePoint accepts, it'll kick it back a server error. So it's possible, even though our flow is perfect, that we could still get a failed upload. That's something you need to recognize, and don't always just try to figure out how your flow is broken. Maybe it's not your flow. Look and see what happened so that you can evaluate. Maybe it was the data source that didn't like what you did for whatever reason. For instance, let's suppose that Dropdown on SharePoint was edited by somebody and they had lodging, and this still said hotel. That means that when they click hotel, SharePoint would say no can do. So because of these various reasons this can fail, I'm going to also add a parallel branch right here. And on this parallel branch, I'm going to copy this guy. I love this feature. I don't know. I feel like I owe the Flow team money for that feature. Now I can click on my clipboard and I can paste that. And then what I'm going to do is revise the name, of course. So I'm going to rename this to mobile notification failed upload. I'm going to rename this mobile notification successful upload. So very little to do when you have the copy and paste. And then here I want to say, sorry, there was a problem with your upload. Please try again. Okay, I'm not going to be very granular on this one, but I am going to let myself know that didn't work, right? I'm also not going to provide any links because there's no file. I could provide a link to the details page of this flow if I want to investigate there first. Okay, so now, do I want both of these to occur at the same time no matter what? No, I only want this one on the right to occur if something up here fails. And actually, I'm concerned not just about this one, which is the one it's after. I'm concerned about this one too. But I don't want to move this above that one because this over here, for instance, contains the link from this one. So what I'm going to do is a little trick, and I think it's good organization too. I'm going to add an action called scope. I love scope. That's another thing I think I owe somebody money for, because it's worth a lot of money to save the time and energy it takes to organize this stuff. I'm going to add a scope, and I'm going to insert those two actions into that scope. Okay, I'm going to do that slower. Okay, give me a second. You know, it's part of those, some of this is like, how good are you at dragging things? Try it again. All right. Nope. All right. Sometimes what I will do when I have this problem is I will refresh my screen. So maybe save. I'm waiting for that. You see that symbol that looks like a circle with a line in it? If I let go at that point, it won't go. But I should see that kind of like not circle with the line through it. And then I should be able to let go. So what I'm going to do is save, and then I'm going to close my flow and reopen it. I have had this happen before to me. I'm going to save, and then it's very intermittent, but we'll probably get it fixed for you. And then I'm going to drag up here and let go, and then it works, okay? I don't know why closing and opening a flow is kind of like rebooting your Windows device. Okay, so now both of these things are in a scope, and I'm going to just name this scope file upload, because the upload is really in two parts. First create the file and then add the property. So guess what happens over here in my configure run after? Now I don't have to pick one of those actions. I can just say when this scope fails. So anything in there that fails now can be responded to in the trigger. Notice very clearly, it is not about the action above now. It's about the scope, which kind of pretends to be the action above right now. And I love grouping things into scopes, not only for this reason, but buttloads of others. Okay, so I'm going to hit done here. You'll see the little red line there that lets you know this is a configure run after. And then we're going to save, and we're going to test. And I have a couple of receipts on my desktop that I can use. Let's take a quick look at the first one. So, desktop. I have a receipt called Trader Joe's, and it's for $67.78. Let's do that one first. I'm going to do Trader Joe's on the desktop. And then we're going to say that we bought that yesterday. I could look at the receipt to tell what day, but I'm pretty sure this is years ago because this is just Bing searches, right? So they get the receipts. And then $67.78 was the amount. You will understand why I'm putting that in later. And then I'm going to do this meals because maybe I'm in an efficiency room and so I can cook my own meals. So I went to Trader Joe to get some healthy food to cook. And now I'm going to run that flow. We're going to make sure it doesn't break anywhere. So we're going to watch it. Looks like it's doing well. I did get a notification on my phone and it says exactly what we wanted it to say. My upload was successful, right? And notice it says your receipt for $68.78 was, and this is what popped up on my phone, by the way. And this link right here is the link to the actual receipt. Now I see a problem here. So let me go back in here and check my file name. .png. Save. Save. I'm just making sure that that PNG stays. Let's test again because we did have a problem. I'm going to perform the test again. I'm watching that thing. And now I'm going to upload my photo of the Trader Joe. And you'll see when we go to SharePoint what happened. I'm going to say I bought this here. I'm going to put in $67.78. And then it says meals. And I'm going to run the flow. Ping is still there. We're good. Okay, no problems there. Good. We got a file name that should be working okay. Worries me that there's a dot there, but let's see how it went. So I'm gonna put this back on this side of the screen. And the first time, the reason I did it over is because it didn't have an extension. And if it doesn't have an extension, it won't be recognized as the photo. So when I change this view to tiles, you should see the actual receipt. So this one is blank, you can tell. So I'm gonna delete this one. Because we don't need it. This one though did come out as a folder, as a photo, and so when I click on it, it opens it. All right, so let's do one more receipt. So I'm gonna run the button again and choose a different receipt. I have another one on my desktop. Uber receipt. The Uber receipt is for $33.48. So this person could also do a screenshot of their phone because the Uber receipt is actually directly on their phone, but they can do a screenshot or they could download that picture and then use that. They would select the file in that case, right? And then this is transportation. All right, so then we'll run that flow. We're going to go check on SharePoint. I did get a notification, and you can see the two receipts there. And that's because I'm in tile mode. If I go to list mode, you can actually see all of our metadata. So I want to talk a little bit about this metadata before I let you go. Now that we've done that, you can do these kind of filters and grouping by expense types, right? And now all your transportation is together versus all your meals. Right? You can do filters and sorts and all kinds of things. One of my favorite things is calculations. So you can actually go in here into your library settings and click on your view. And then where it says totals, you can click on sum for an amount. And now it will actually sum your expenses right on the screen. Isn't that beautiful? Plus, I can attach Power BI to this and get analytics on how much money we're spending on transportation, airfare, etc. In addition to being able to export this out to Excel and pivot table it. Oh, the options are multiple. So I'm going to leave you with this for today. This was a lot to talk about. We had fun time on day 13, and I encourage you to give it a try. And I will be talking to you tomorrow at the next 25 Days of Flows, the Power Automate Advent Calendar.